Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 23 playthrough of the Colorado Rockies. We are about midway through the 2052 season, and it's been a very good year for the Rockies. Have a 51-36 record. We are first place in the NL West, 2 games ahead of San Diego. And we've got the third best record in baseball, second best record in the National League. So as I said, it's been a very good season, but quite honestly, it's been a little bit under my expectations. This is a team that won 96 and 97 games each of the previous 2 seasons when we made the playoffs. We brought on a couple of really big-time starting pitchers this past offseason. And quite honestly, I was expecting the team to be somewhat more dominant. We're 7 games behind the Braves right now for the best record in the National League and the best record in baseball. And I did honestly think that we would be, going through this season with something more similar to the Braves record than our own record at this point. So while we're almost where we want to be, we want to have the best record in baseball, but at the very least we do, if the season were to end today, have a first round bye in the playoffs. Still feel like it's been a little disappointing on the margins. And one of the reasons that perhaps it's been a little disappointing on the margins is one of our starting pitchers, Juan Vargas, and we were talking about him a little bit at the end of the last episode. Vargas has been a excellent pitcher for us. We signed him as a free agent shortly before our first season here in Colorado. And he, before this year, had been excellent, combining for a 48-23 record over his 3 seasons, league leading 22 wins in 2050. But he's only 4-8 this year, and his ERA has ballooned to 6.17. Given that we've got 4 left-handers in the rotation now, at the end of our last episode, we were talking about potentially trying to hit the trade market to get an upgrade from Vargas, who I think we would move to the pen, and I think he would be very useful there, given that we have recently signed him to an extension. And that still is something that we're going to explore. But I think right now we're going to give a chance to Will Lucio, who's a player we picked up in a trade with Minnesota almost 2 years ago. He's been good for us since we picked him up. That first year he was not, with a 6.07 ERA. Last year he split time between Albuquerque and Colorado. But this year he's been up all year, and he's been better than good. He's been excellent. 2.66 ERA over 47 1/3 innings pitched. He's a right-handed pitcher, and he does have a profile with a 4-pitch arsenal, all of which are kind of major league average or a little better. Enough stamina to start. The ground ball pitcher type, the ground baller tendencies, and the really good movement on his pitches that we hope to see in Colorado. I think there may be potentially better options available on the trade market as we get closer to the trade deadline. But for the time being, we are going to swap Lucio into the rotation and put Juan Vargas into a middle relief role, which will make our bullpen a little more balanced with 3 lefties out there now, 3 lefties in the rotation and 3 lefties in the bullpen. So still an even split on our staff with 6 righties and 6 lefties at this point. So we'll see how Lucio does over the next 2, 3, up to 4 weeks before we really have to make a decision at the trade deadline. Right now, we're getting ready for the first-year player draft. We did make an offer to an international amateur free agent second baseman Adrian Ortega earlier today. We'll find out what happens with him, and then hopefully the Rockies can play even some better ball here in July than we have over the course of the season so far. Hopefully open up a little bit more of a lead in the NL West, close some of the gap that is between us and the Braves right now for the best record in baseball, and then hopefully also stay healthy so we are making any decisions we make to add players that as we get closer to the trade deadline from a position of strength rather than desperation. And we've got some good news. Adrian Ortega did sign that deal to join our minor league system, so he will be at the international complex likely for the next couple of years. You can see we're doing some scouting to get ready for the draft, which is a little less than a week from now at this point. And some good news on the injury front. Our center fielder is finally healthy and ready to go. It's been shelved for about 6 weeks now. Tony Padilla having a nice year for us. He is a player who is wrecked physically, even though he's relatively young. And he's also a player who's going to start making some pretty serious money, close to $10 million expected next year. But he's been very good for us defensively, obviously, with those ratings. And he's had some pretty productive offensive years for us as well. Given that he's wrecked physically, we're going to give him a day or two down in AAA on a rehab assignment just to ease him back into things a little bit. We've played well over the last few days since we last checked in and have opened up the lead on the Padres by another half game to 2.5 at this point. And it's time to find out our representation for the All-Star team this year. I would think that one of our big new additions on the pitching staff, the big new addition on the pitching staff, Rogelio Loera, would expect him to be named an all-star. Would think that we're going to have several everyday players as well. Let's find out what the roster actually looks like. Taking a look at the pitchers, as expected, Rogelio Loera, 10-5, 3.93 ERA, and 165 strikeouts already, so the all-time great who joined us this past off-season, named to the All-Star team. Elijah Moore, who had a great year for us last year, hitting 286, 22 homers, 76 ribbies. First baseman also makes the All-Star team. And then Robbie Carrillo makes his second consecutive All-Star team after a great year with us last year where he finished second in the NL in batting, hitting 302 this year with 19 homers and 56 runs batted in. So Carrillo, Moore, and Loera were the three obvious all-stars that I felt we had on the team. I did kind of think we'd probably sneak a couple more in there, but was not to be the case. But 3 all-stars for the Colorado Rockies this year. And as we get ready for the All-Star break and then the draft very soon, we've got a 3-game lead on the Padres here in the West. We have gotten by the Blue Jays and now have the second best record in baseball. And we are 5 games behind the Braves for that best record in baseball. And we've made it to the amateur draft, where we will be picking last in the first round, behind all of the 29 other teams, plus 3 compensatory picks that were awarded. So probably not going to get a superstar. One positive thing is that in the second round, we do have 2 picks near the end of the round, our own, and then our compensatory pick for losing Omar Jones, former closer for us for 1 year to free agency last offseason. So probably not going to get any superstars picking 33rd, but if with our 1 first rounder and 2 second rounders, we can get some players who at least have potential to be contributors and maybe one of them develops into a big-time player, that would seem to be a victory. And we've now moved forward to that 33rd pick, final pick of the first round. We'll kind of visit these 6 players who our scout at least thinks are the most interesting as far as the batters, and then check in on the pitchers. Gilberto Alba, a durable 18-year-old catcher, above average defensively, good work ethic. Looks like he's got a little bit of pop in his bat, particularly with the home run power. Could be an interesting player for Colorado. I think that with the plus contact and potentially well above average home run power, he would play pretty well in Colorado. Like the fact that he's above average defensively. So certainly an interesting prospect, particularly with that good work ethic and the durability that we always like to see. His bonus demand is also well below slot. So Alba, definitely someone we would think about if we don't see somebody we like more. Abraham Guardo, interesting right fielding prospect. Ton of speed, another really good personality, could play right or left, and a real interesting bat with that great contact and gap power combined with the speed. Could be slamming extra base hits all over the place. Not going to strike out a lot, and actually can hit some home runs, particularly in Colorado. Just not going to walk a lot, which isn't great, but also a pretty interesting bat for the 33rd pick in the draft. Sergio Lucio, a right fielder. Like the durability, looks like he can be average or a little bit above average in all of the offensive categories. Pretty average defensively also. Think I like those other two guys more than him. Felix Arenas, a catcher, average defensively, average-ish kind of bat. He is durable. Like the other catcher better than him in terms of Alba. Caden Kimbrough, first baseman, doesn't bring a lot to the table defensively. Good contact, good home run power, everything else kind of average. Not a lot of speed, not the best personality. Think I still prefer Alba or Guardo to him. And then shortstop, maybe this will be interesting, Jamel Robinson. Decent potential bat for a shortstop. Not a great glove, quite honestly. He's a second baseman or a third baseman, and I don't think you love him at either of those positions. He's definitely not a shortstop in the majors. Does have a decent personality. Somebody to consider. He is almost 19 years old, so he's definitely on the older side for a high school prospect, and he's committed to Stanford. So a few interesting prospects there. Taking a look at the pitchers who are available. Bud Schultz stands out, at least as far as our scout. 17-year-old Canadian pitcher. Not a perfect personality, has enough stamina to start. Looks like he could potentially have a 4-pitch arsenal if that changeup develops. Even if it doesn't, probably has a 3-pitch arsenal. So looks like a decent starting pitching prospect. His competition level up in Ontario, not viewed as being all that robust. Neutral ground ball, fly ball tendencies, normal pitcher type. Not a horrible prospect, but probably not somebody that we're going to reach for. Looks like there's a few relievers here. Franklin Gonzalez, we're not going to take a reliever in the first round unless it's someone who looks completely dominant, which is not him. Victor Morales, another reliever. Again, this guy drops to the third round. We'd think about either of them, but not right here. We'll also check in on the last reliever, Alex Romero. Again, nothing exceptional about him. A few other starting prospects, Marcus Peterson. Not a horrible prospect for the end of the first round, but also not anyone to get all that excited about, particularly with the changeup often being a pitch that's difficult to develop, could end up in the bullpen. Leo Sweeney, another Canadian prospect, although his competition level, because he was down in high school in New Jersey, is at least at an average level. He's honestly probably the most interesting of the pitching prospects to me, just because his fastball is kind of already close to major league level. If the sinker and slider developed, he's got a 3-pitch arsenal. If he had some ground ball tendencies, would feel even better about it. Do like the work ethic and the stamina. Hard to sign, looking for $9.5 million. That might be why he's still around. And then Jose Terrell is the last of the top prospects, at least in terms of the star ratings. Another similar player who's looking for way over slot at this point. Do like the potential for really good movement on his pitches, but probably does end up being a 3-pitch guy. So some decent pitching prospects there. Honestly, no one that excites me all that much. Going to take a look at who Mr. Delgado thinks we should draft, and then I'll spend a little more time offline going through some other players to make sure I make the right decision. But Mr. Delgado recommends that we go with Abraham Guardo, the right fielder, who was one of the guys that we were most interested in. And it's a tough decision for me. It does come down to the catcher, Gilberto Alba, as well as Guardo. Alba, I like the durability. I like the home run power. Like the above average defense. Guardo, really like the personality. Really like the speed. And like the fact that particularly in cores, with that contact, gap power, and speed, I mean, this is a guy who could, if everything goes well, hit 350 with 50 doubles and 15 triples at his peak kind of level, maybe even more triples than that in cores. And he's got potentially enough home run power to hit 20, 25 homers a year, also playing in cores, maybe even 30. So he would put up some numbers if he fully develops, and given the work ethic and intelligence, old school work ethic, he's very coachable. The only thing I don't like about the guy is that he's just not going to draw a lot of walks. But again, with that contact and gap power, even if his, he kind of follows his high school pattern and he walks a very small amount. His on-base percentage is generally only 30, 35 points better than his batting average. But if you're out there hitting 330, 335, 340, and your on-base percentage is still in the 370, 380 kind of range, you can be a pretty productive offensive player. So I'm going to go with Guardo. I know some of you probably think I should have went with the catcher. If his defense was a little more exceptional, I most likely would have. I think he's going to be, or would have been, a productive player in cores, but I just think that Guardo is potentially higher upside, even though he is a little older. So we are going to go follow our scout suggestion here in the first round and pick up Abraham Fireman Guardo with our first pick. And I'm not going to lie, I'm a little surprised that Gilberto Alba is still around here in the second round, 30-some-odd picks later than we just picked in the first round. We've now got 2 of the next 3 picks, I believe. We got to pick, then the Angels, and then come back to us again. So Alba is definitely extremely tempting to me right here. Scouting director recommends that we go with Alba. I'm not even going to look at anybody else. I almost took him in the first round. Our scout thinks he's a 5-star potential guy for a second-round pick to potentially have a guy who could be a starting catcher for us, even though I, in a perfect world, would want better defense. I think the good work ethic, the durability, the home run power, the above-average contact potentially would all play very well in Colorado. So we are going to go ahead and bring on Mr. Alba here in the second round. So by the time we got to our picks, the 2 guys that we liked the most, we ended up getting in the first and second round. And now we're going to spend a little time digging in a little deeper as to where we may go with this supplemental pick that we got for the loss of Omar Jones last year. And I think I have a sense of who I want to pick here with the second round pick, but we'll see what the scouting director recommends. He recommends Sergio Lucio, the right fielder that we talked about back in the first round. I think he's a fine prospect. As I talked about, he's average or a little above average in every offensive category. If he completely develops in terms of his batting ratings, he is durable, but pretty average defensively, not the best personality. To me, average in just about everything is a fourth outfielder, and that does not interest me as much as, and those of you who have watched me in the past know where I'm going. I'm going to a starting pitcher, all else being equal. Andy Mendoza out of Notre Dame, 21-year-old, ground ball or pitcher type, ground ball pitcher, and looks like movement could potentially be his best trait. So I think he's a guy who could potentially play decently in cores. He's a right-handed pitcher. His stamina is not great, but it's enough that he could be a 5 to 6 inning starting pitcher. And he's got 4 pitches that are close to major league quality right now. Our scout thinks they could all be a little bit above major league average if they develop. So I think he's a pretty high floor prospect. His ceiling is certainly not incredibly high, but with our third pick and our second rounder, get a guy who looks like he could be a good solid fourth or fifth starter with characteristics in terms of his movement and his ground ball tendencies that I think would play pretty well in cores. To me, Andy Mendoza is the way to go, and we are going to draft him with our second round pick. And we've now made it to the 4th round. We picked another starting pitcher in the 3rd round. Not as good as the previous prospect out of Notre Dame, but still like to go with starters, all else being equal. Here in the 4th round, our scout continues to recommend Caden Kimbrough, who he recommended in the previous round also, and we overruled him. But for a 4th round pick, although I don't love his personality, I don't love the poor defense, the no speed, the contact and the home run power alone, to me, are a reason to at least give the guy a chance. He's not looking for a ton of money. He's fallen all the way to the 4th round. And I think at this point, Kimbrough is a pretty interesting prospect to try to bring on board. We'll try to bring him on for slot rather than his demand at this point, at least initially, but think that that's a pretty interesting talent to be getting in the 4th round with our 5th pick of the draft. And after being back for just a few games since the All-Star break, Tony Padilla facing some back stiffness, minimal impact on his hitting, moderate impact on his running. We're going to be conservative with him and just put him on the 10-day IL. We'll go back to the well down in AAA and bring on Mr. Brito, who we just sent down a few days ago. So the injury situation with Padilla has always been a bit of a frustration, and it's getting more acute at this point. There is an argument to just kind of make Danny Ruiz our full-time center fielder. I don't necessarily want to do that quite yet, but Padilla, as we talked about, is going to be making a lot of money next year through arbitration. And given that he's wrecked physically, it's getting to the point where if we do decide we need to make a trade over the next few weeks and there's still a market for Padilla, he's a guy that I would actually consider possibly trading if we can bring on a real big-time pitcher to bolster our team, given that we do have Ruiz who can play center for us if we move on from him. Lose a little bit of depth in the outfield, but even if Ruiz ended up hurt, Carrillo could certainly still slide over and play a competent center field, so we do have some options. And we made it to the midway mark of July now. Obviously not a ton of games in the books because of the All-Star break, but we've got a 4.5 game lead on the Padres, and we are now only 2 games behind the Braves for the best record in baseball. So we're definitely playing well. You can see 8-2 over our last 10. We've won 5 in a row at this point. Big question now is whether we're going to pursue somebody in a trade to bolster the team further. Fan interest has been dipping a bit recently from 94 at the start of the month to 91. So maybe we need a shiny new object for the fans to be interested in. But quite honestly, we're selling out pretty consistently over the last several games. So that's an argument to maybe even raise ticket prices. We'll see how things go over the next couple of weeks before we have to make a decision on anything. Will Lucio has only started one game for us because of the All-Star break. We'll take a look at the game log and see exactly what he did. Went 6 1/3 innings, 5 hits, 3 earned runs, so it was a quality start. He got the W. His ERA did climb by 20 points almost, but it's still a very strong 2.85. So definitely would like to see a couple more starts from Lucio over the next few weeks before we make a decision on whether we want to go in a different direction as far as a right-handed starter for the rotation. And another week is in the books. Rockies continue to play some pretty solid baseball. We took 2 out of 3 from Kansas City, and then we swept Detroit. We've got Arizona, the Padres, and the Dodgers coming up. So that's a good schedule for us with 11 games over 10 days against divisional rivals as we're getting ready to approach the trade deadline. Certainly that could go a long way towards determining whether we feel like we need to do anything or not. You can see we've opened up a 5-game lead now on the Padres, 7.5 on the Dodgers, and we are a game and a half behind the Braves now for the best record in baseball. So it's been a pretty good month so far for the Rockies, certainly making up some ground in the standings. And Will Lucio in his second start got another win, and you can see his ERA dropped pretty materially. So it was a more than a quality start for him. He ended up, if I could pull up the proper information that I am looking for on Mr. Lucio, his game log, there we go. No earned runs over 6 innings, allowed 4 hits, 2 walks, struck out 3, 65 game score. So his first 2 starts make me thus far regret the fact that we hadn't gotten him into the rotation even sooner. And maybe it mitigates the need for us to bring on a big-time starting pitcher and trade, but given that we are all in on this season, I'm certainly not going to be conservative when it comes to spending money and trying to bring on talent. We do have all of our draftees signed at this point, so we kind of know what our money situation looks like. We've got a 2.7, almost 2.8 million in terms of our ability to take on some salaries. So I think we'll see what happens over the next week and then potentially make some decisions. Padilla looks like he's fully healthy. He'll be back in 2 days. So hopefully we'll have Padilla back at 100% and everyone healthy. And as I talked about earlier, that'll allow us to hopefully be a little more objective around our decision making rather than feeling like there's a hole caused by injuries that we need to fill in the trade market. And we've simmed ahead another week, and it was another good week for the Rockies. You can see we took 4 out of 5 against Arizona and then 2 out of 3 against San Diego. Interestingly, we were going for a sweep in the final game of both series, and those were the 2 that we lost. But still heading into 3 games with the Dodgers in the best position by far that we've been in the division all year. Opened up an 8.5 game lead on both the Dodgers and the Padres at this point, and we actually are now 2.5 up on the Braves for the best record in baseball. So it's been a resurgent month of July for the Rockies so far. We'll check in on where we are in terms of the team statistics. Obviously, the record this month, 19-5, has been excellent, even better than that great April that we had so far. First in the National League in runs scored, 6th in runs allowed. That, I think, is about as good as it can get for a team that's playing half of their games in Colorado. 4th in starters ERA, 8th in bullpen ERA. Defensive ratings are middle of the pack, and shockingly, we're still not leading the league in home runs, even though we lead the league in almost every other offensive category. But things are looking really good, and quite honestly, Lucio has been a revelation as our 4th starter. Taking a look at the game log, these last 2 games, the The only reason these last two weren't quality starts is because he only went 5 innings, but 1 earned run over 10 innings in 2 starts, and he's won 4 consecutive starts since we moved him into the rotation. So that has worked out really well for us. And, quite honestly, Vargas has cut his ERA by almost a run since he moved to the bullpen. So it's been a win-win for us thus far. I do think that Lucio has a pretty decent profile to be a starting pitcher. His stuff being average-ish, and I think that's a change since we last looked at him. I thought he was a 55 when we first looked at him, but obviously those things can change over time. Was that we thought he had 55 potential, I guess, and we don't see that anymore. But still, with the movement, the ground ball tendencies, and the 4-pitch arsenal, no reason that he can't continue to be a pretty effective pitcher for us. I don't think as a starter he's going to end up pitching to a 2.33 ERA over the course of the year. But right now, he's doing really well. So I don't feel a ton of pressure to make any moves right now. That said, and we've talked about this from the start of this season in our previous episode, we are in win now mode with this team. So I am going to spend some time perusing the trade block and just kind of looking and doing player searches in general to see if there's anyone we can come up with who could be had for a reasonable price and help ensure that this team continues to play some great baseball the rest of the way and hopefully long into October. So taking a look at the trade block, the most interesting starting pitcher on the block from our perspective, I think, is Danny Flores, 32-year-old with the Yankees. Ground baller, extreme ground ball tendencies, good movement on his pitches, 3-pitch arsenal, has the stamina to start. Over the course of his career, he's been a bit above average in terms of his ERA plus and his FIP minus. So I think he's a guy who would fit in really nicely in Colorado. He's making over $12 million a year, and he's also signed for next season. So he's a guy that we could bring on and have for next year. I just don't know if at this point he's any better than Will Lucio. Lucio's got a 4-pitch arsenal. Now, I don't think his 4 pitches are quite as good, but certainly having that 4th pitch in the repertoire helps. Also, very good movement, above average control. His stuff isn't quite as good. Similar ground ball tendencies, although not as extreme. I certainly think like Flores is a good pitcher. Actually, Lucio's control is a little better, but Flores' stuff is a little better. I just don't think it's a huge upgrade. We'd love it if the Yankees kept a big chunk of the contract. And they're willing to talk with us, but we're going to have to give up a great prospect or a pretty big-time player to get him. So the cost certainly is high. It's not something where I feel like we can't put a deal together that would work. The cost certainly is not prohibitive, and I do like the fact that we'd have him for another season next year. But I just don't know if it's enough of an upgrade from Lucio that we should chase it. And the other option is to just try to find a right-hander who kind of meets our criteria, who's not available on the trade market. And Jose Ortega of the Brewers kind of fits the bill there. Can see a similar profile to Lucio. Ground ball tendencies, a 3-pitch arsenal. His movement is what really stands out. He is durable. Over the course of his career, he's been a bit above average as a pitcher, signed for another couple years. I'm honestly a little more intrigued by Ortega than the guy who is on the trade block. And largely it's because actually 50% is too high, but when we start getting the percent of his contract down a little bit lower, and we add in Victor Duque, who's our AAA closer. Great personality, 23-year-old. He's been lights out in AAA this year with a 1.29 ERA over 35 innings. Don't love that he doesn't have ground ball tendencies. Think he's definitely a good prospect. But we could package Duque with our former starting center fielder, Tony Padilla, and get the deal done. And you can see they'll keep a lot of his contract, 65% of his contract. And Padilla has been an incredibly useful player for us since we started this sim. Take a look at his major league performance. And 3 years with us, 110, 163, and 106 OPS pluses in the 3 first years, 119 this year. Was an all-star for us in 2050 when he had that monster season, hitting over 300 with 33 homers. But he is wrecked physically. And right now, he's not even in our starting lineup since we brought him back. Now, we certainly could get him back in there if we chose to move Mr. Ruiz back to second base and push Rogelio Terrazas out of the lineup. And I do feel that Padilla is a better offensive player than Terrazas, and he's also a really good defensive center fielder. But I don't know that we're going to be able to spend close to $10 million on a wrecked 29-year-old who's a marginal starting player for us at this point next year. And if we can bring on a pretty big-time starting pitcher, he's not an ace, but if you're using Jose Ortega as your third or fourth starter, which is what we'd probably be doing, I think you're feeling pretty good about your pitching staff. The fact that we can give up a closer, a good closer prospect, but admittedly not a perfect fit for Coors, and a really good center fielder, but we can bring on a guy who's going to plug right into our rotation as a right-hander who signed for another couple years, and we're only going to be on the hook for less than $6 million of his contract both of those years. That to me is very interesting. Again, I don't know that we need Ortega, because particularly with the way Lucio is pitching, I feel like we've got all the pitching that we need. And it is certainly dangerous to get rid of Padilla, because then our outfield is definitely weaker. I feel good about Carrillo, Ruiz, and Perez as the starters, but if we have some injuries, we've kind of lost some depth. That being said, with Padilla being wrecked anyways, the question is always, is he actually going to be healthy when we need him to be healthy? So I'm going to think about this one. I'm not going to pull the trigger right now. I'm going to see how these next couple days go against the Dodgers. But I think this is a potentially bold move that might make sense for us. Would I rather have Jose Ortega at $6 million for the next couple years, or Tony Padilla at $10 million for next year, and then $17 million for his final year of arbitration? Given that he's wrecked physically, to me, there's no question about those. You take the durable starting pitcher who's a proven major leaguer and only a couple years older than Padilla, and you run with that to the bank. So that's kind of what I'm thinking right now, and I know we don't really need the starting pitcher right now, but pitching can be so volatile and tenuous and subject to injuries. The reason I don't want to do it, and this is going to sound crazy, is that we've done so well with this 12-man pitching staff, and I believe that the only player on this 12-man pitching staff who has minor league options is Will Lucio. That if we made this trade, we may have to send Lucio to the minors, despite the fact that he's been so incredible as a starting pitcher for us, which just seems absolutely ridiculous to even consider doing that. I guess the other thing we could think about is moving on from one of the other relievers and just trying to trade them away, but the bullpen has been pretty sound this year. So we've got some things to think about over these last 2 or 3 days till we get to the trade deadline. And this is one situation where I'd love to just kind of leave an open-ended episode and ask for the advice of the commenters out there, but I'm going to run with it and make a decision myself over the next 2 or 3 days of game time, and I'm sure you'll let me know in the comments down below if you would have done something different than I did. And we've won the first 2 games of the series against the Dodgers, so when we take a look at the standings, we're now 10 games up on the Padres, 10.5 on the Dodgers, and we're up 3.5 on the Braves for the best record in baseball. So this month of July has really completely turned this season around. And because of that, a little reticent around potentially making the trade that I was just talking about. That said, Padilla's already been on the IL twice this year, and he also had back spasms that impacted him for a couple days on 2 occasions this season also. You can see he's had back spasms 3 times since April 12th that have impacted him, and that's been something that has been a trend of his over the course of his career. His back certainly isn't going to just magically heal itself. And right now he's not in our starting lineup. It impacts our depth if we were to have an injury to Ruiz or Carrillo. Then our outfield defense is a lot worse. But I'm at the point with Padilla where I just don't have confidence that he's going to be healthy and in the lineup for us when we need him. And although he's an excellent defensive center fielder with a good bat, which is an incredibly valuable thing, as we talked about, $10 million next season and then 17 the year after is getting expensive for a guy who we're never going to have a ton of confidence is going to be in the lineup. And Danny Ruiz is almost as good defensively. He's durable. We're pretty confident he's going to be out there every day. I don't think his bat is quite as good, but if you put up average offensive numbers with that glove and you're playing good defensive center field every day in Coors, I think there's still some value there. And I just think bringing on Jose Ortega would be just such a huge move for our rotation, not just this year, but for the next 2 years. It actually had changed where with Duque and Padilla, they would only keep 60% of his contract now. But when we added in AAA player Jordan Ventura, who's a veteran who we signed about a year and a half ago, he's just been playing in AAA for us as organizational depth. Happy to throw him at this point. That gets them to the point where they're keeping 80% of Ortega's contract. So we've got Jose Ortega for 2 more years after this at a little bit more than $3 million a year for a excellent third or fourth starter with all the traits that we try to bring on board to our team here in Colorado. I know it's crazy, perhaps, to be trading away a really good young closer prospect and a guy who was, until a few weeks ago, our starting center fielder. But I just don't have confidence that Padilla is going to be healthy when we need him to be. And I feel like Ortega just helps us take this rotation in terms of its quality and depth up to an entirely new level. So we're going to go ahead and complete that trade. Not going to think about it anymore. Just going to act. And it does put us in a position where right now I think we're going to still run with the 13 players. We're not going to make a move to the pitching staff right now other than putting Ortega onto the team. And I assume he's going to take over for Lucio or Toledo in the rotation when we ask Hartman for the staff. Yeah, Ortega takes over as our fourth starter like I was expected, and our manager wants to put Vargas back into the rotation. No, we're going to run with Javi Toledo for now. And I feel a little bit bad for Lucio, but now we've got Lucio, who's still making the major league minimum. And we've got Vargas signed for another couple years, who could start for us if we needed. I feel like we've just got such incredible, high-quality starting pitching depth at this point. That even if we end up in a situation like last year where we lost Alvarado right before the playoffs, still real happy with our 4-man rotation. And honestly, if we lose a couple of guys, the one guy obviously I don't want to lose is Loera. Would love to see what he can do for us in the playoffs. But, if we lost an Alvarado and a Javi Toledo, we've still got Loera, Vasquez, Ortega, and potentially Lucio, or less likely Vargas, as a fourth starter in the playoffs. I just think that pitching can always be so injury prone, but I feel like we've just built into the rotation with this trade a lot of redundancy and an incredible amount of depth. And I do feel bad for Lucio that he's going back into long relief right now. All he did, as we've talked about, was pitch 4 really good games for us and win every game that he started for us. Went at least 5 innings every game. Gave up 1 earned run over his last 3 starts, 16 innings. So he's still a guy who I think has a big role for us going forward. But right now, is he as good as Ortega? Probably not quite as good. And the fact that we've got Ortega for the next few years at a minimal amount that we're going to need to be paying, I think is huge. And getting the other thing that I haven't talked about that I did think about, we were probably going to need to get some big contracts off the book this offseason anyways. And getting Padilla off the books now has cleared up a lot more money for extensions for us. Because we do have to keep in mind that Elijah Moore is a free agent after this season. And he's still looking for around $40 million a year. And we'd potentially like to bring him back. So moving on from Padilla and clearing up some money there may help us be a little more likely to be able to bring Elijah Moore back. And we are going to need his bat, particularly with the departure of Padilla. So I think this was a move that makes sense. I've talked myself into thinking it was the right way to go, but would love to hear your thoughts in the comments as to whether I may have overplayed my hand as far as the pitching, not given Lucio the respect that he deserved with how great he had been pitching for us, and maybe set ourselves up for the fact that if we do get banged up in the outfield, we don't have the same kind of depth as we did. The thing is that, Carrillo in left field is an Iron Man. Ruiz in center field is durable. I feel like if we're going to have any issues, it's more likely going to be in right field where Bobby Perez plays. And I think that Mata or Melinhos, especially being one right-handed and one left-handed hitter, if we lost Bobby Perez, I think those guys as a platoon could kind of get us through. If Carrillo or Ruiz gets hurt, then to a degree I think this blows up on us, because right now we've got such good outfield defense with the two of them out there. We just don't have the same type of depth as we had when we had Padilla on the team. So that's our big move. And we'll find out over the next 2 months of the regular season, and then hopefully a long run in the postseason, whether it paid off or not. While I'm thinking about it, team is playing great. I'm going to bump up ticket prices by $1 to $33. May cost us meeting the owner's attendance goal this year, which is to get to 48,000. You can see we're just on the brink of that, but we still got another couple years to get there. The big goal is to really win the championship this year. And hopefully the moves that I made, or the one real move that I made, helps get us a little closer to that quite ambitious goal. And we beat the Dodgers on the final day of the month, so we are now to August 1st, past the trade deadline. 10-game lead on the Padres, 11.5 on the Dodgers, and we are now up 3.5 on the Braves for the best record in baseball. So obviously it was an incredible month of July for the Rockies, going 22-5. We do see that Moore, who I just talked about being a guy that we want to try to re-sign and hopefully freeing up some money from Padilla, helps us maybe get him re-signed before he hits free agency this offseason. And he did win the NL Top Batter of the Month, .398 average with 10 homers, 26 ribbies, 20 runs scored. On the year, hitting .303, 32 homers, 96 ribbies. So we certainly want him back. I am kind of wondering if Will Lucio, the guy that we just pulled out of the rotation, is going to be named the NL's top pitcher for July. And it was Will Lucio, so that says it all right there. The guy that we just pulled out of the rotation to make room for our big trade acquisition was NL Pitcher of the Month. So 4-0 record, 161 ERA in those 4 starts. So he's having an excellent season. Maybe I've overthought things and we have too much pitching right now, and I should have just kept Lucio in the rotation. But I do feel real good about having Jose Ortega for the next few years. I feel that gives us a ton of insurance and a ton of depth, and also a much lower cost option than the likes of really everyone else in our rotation, because Loera is a huge free agent signing. Alvarado was a very expensive free agent signing a couple of years ago. Javi Toledo was an expensive free agent signing the year before last. And then Vasquez is a guy who we traded for, but we have now bought out his arbitration years and 3 of his free agent years at pretty big values. So feel that between Lucio, Vargas, and Ortega, at least we have some lower cost alternatives for the rotation if we do end up in some type of situation where we have to shed salary. And if we're not in a situation where we have to shed salary, our rotation is stacked. and it's better balanced between lefties and righties now with the addition of Ortega, and the fact that we figured out that we may have had a great starter on our team for the last couple seasons, and we just only gave him one start back in 2050 when we first picked him up, and then never started him again until these past 4 games. So feel like it's an embarrassment of riches right now in terms of the pitching staff. And quite honestly, after the big month that we had in July, it's just an embarrassment of riches as far as how this season has gone. It's totally turned around to be the type of season we thought it could be over the last month. And now it's a matter of holding on to the best record in baseball over the last 2 months of the season, ensuring that this team is healthy and ready to go in the playoffs, and then hoping that this high-powered and extremely deep pitching staff that we've built can deliver us, if we have a first-round bye, hopefully 11 wins in the playoffs. 3 in the NLDS, 4 in the NLCS, and 4 in the World Series. And that is certainly the goal for this team. We are as win now as we've ever been. And we'll find if we're able to close the deal as far as home field advantage throughout the playoffs in our next episode. Until then, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.